Hey there, welcome to DIY Projects with Pete. Today we're going to build a concrete end table with a wood base. This is a fun and simple project that I know you can build. We're also going to walk through the process of embedding objects into concrete. For this project, we're going to put a piece of sliced agate flush with the top, but you can also embed things like fossils, rocks, tile, coins, you name it. If you enjoy this video, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Let's get started. For the main tools, you'll want to pick up or borrow a drill, Kreg jig, orbital sander, and safety equipment. For supplies, you'll want some wood glue, stain, silicone caulk, some 2x2s for the wood base, and for the concrete top, you'll need concrete, melamine for the form, some reinforcement, and if you'd like to embed anything like we're going to do today, we have some agates that we picked up at a local gem store. You can pick these up or some fossils, whatever you'd like. Let's get started with today's project.
The first step is to cut the side strips for the mold out of melamine. Cut each strip to 2 1/4 inches in width for a 1.5 inch thick concrete table.
The next step is to cut the base piece for the mold down to size. We started out with a 2 foot by 4 foot sheet of 3/4 inch thick melamine and cut ours down to 24 inches by 14 inches.
Then cut the ends of the side strips down to size for the mold according to the measurements in the plans at DIYpete.com/concrete end table. Piece the wood together to form the mold, then attach the sidewalls to the base of the mold. Pre-drill, and then use 1.5 inch screws through the sidewall and into the base. Take your time and work around all 4 sides to form the mold. Make sure the mold is square, then cut the diamond mesh reinforcement for the concrete using a snips. The reinforcement will be cut smaller than the mold, with about 1 inch between the reinforcement and the sidewalls. Use 100% silicone caulk to seal the edges of the mold and to create a slightly beveled edge for the concrete to form against. Then round the silicone with a caulk tool. Have plenty of paper towels around to remove any excess, and then do a final wipe down of the mold with rubbing alcohol and a paper towel to remove any debris. If you decide to embed an object like the sliced agate we're using, determine where you'd like to place it. Then apply a thin layer of silicone caulk to one side of the object, and you can use a razor blade to get a super thin layer. Then press the sliced agate onto the mold and let the caulk dry for about an hour. Once dry, you can mix up the concrete. Double check that your work surface is level, and then do one last cleaning of the mold prior to pouring. We're going to use Quikcrete's special countertop mix for this project. First, pour the recommended amount of water into a bucket to help minimize dust, and then pour about a half bag of concrete into the bucket. Thoroughly mix the concrete, and I usually shoot for about a peanut butter consistency, but with this mix, they recommend a slightly flowable mixture. So I mixed it to a consistency between peanut butter and pancake batter. Slowly pour the concrete into the mold, making sure it goes into all corners and around the sliced agate. Use your hands along with rubber gloves to help push the concrete into the corners if needed, and fill the mold about halfway full. You can vibrate the concrete at this point to help minimize air voids in the concrete. Let the concrete set up for a couple minutes and then put the mesh reinforcement into place. Try to lay the mesh as flat as possible and then fill the rest of the mold. I ended up needing to mix just a little more concrete, so it took slightly more than a half bag for the entire project. Once you've filled the mold, you'll want to screed off the excess concrete by using a flat board and moving it in a saw-like motion back and forth. Fill low spots as needed and put excess concrete back into the bucket. Then vibrate the concrete one last time. Lifting the work surface up and down quickly works well, and you can also use a rubber mallet, an orbital sander, or a reciprocating saw to vibrate the sides of the mold. Smooth out the surface at the way end using a trowel, and then cover the concrete and let it cure for 24 to 48 hours. While the concrete cures, you can begin creating the wood base for the end table. Start by cutting the 2x2 boards down to size according to the measurements in the plans at DIYpete.com/concrete end table. Sand each of the boards with an orbital sander prior to assembling. Then drill one pocket hole in the end of each long horizontal piece and into 2 of the short horizontal pieces. Use a combination of 2.5 inch Kreg screws and wood glue to connect each of the boards. The pocket holes on the longer boards will face the floor, and the pocket holes on the 2 shorter top boards need to face up. because there isn't enough room for the drill to work underneath between the two legs during assembly. I'd recommend using clamps to hold the boards together during the assembly, and I use jack clamps for the majority of my projects. Cut a 1x10 board down to size for the lower shelf and drill 2 pocket holes on each side of the board so we can attach it to the inside of the 2x2 supports using 1.5-inch Craig screws. Apply a little glue on all of the sides of the shelf board prior to attaching it to the supports. I forgot to drill a pocket hole on the lower 2x2 supports prior to attaching them to the shelf, so I just drilled a pocket hole in them while everything was together. I chose not to drill pocket holes on the shorter boards because there was plenty of support with just the longer boards connected with the pocket holes. Measure 4.5 inches down on each leg and put a mark. This is to line up your shelf so it sits exactly 4.5 inches off the floor. Make sure to use glue and then slide the lower shelf into place. Attach the longer supports to the legs using 2.5-inch screws and clamps to hold the boards in place. Then wipe away excess glue using a damp rag. Do a quick sanding of the wood base prior to applying a finish. I used an oil-based polyurethane sealer from Minwax as a finish. Use a brush to apply 2 thin coats of the polyurethane and sand between coats as needed. The sealer is going to give the wood a honey-colored glow and will protect it from stains.
All right, I want to give a quick shout out to Darren Hardy, the author of one of my favorite books and one I'd highly recommend called The Compound Effect. It's all about getting more things done, being more productive, and how those things we do on a daily basis will add up over time so that we can all reach our own goals, and how consistency will help us find success. If you'd rather listen to this, maybe when you're out on a run or driving in the car, you can get your free audio version at DIYpete.com/audible. All right, let's get back to today's project.
Now that our base is finished and that the concrete has had time to cure, we can demold and reveal the concrete. Start by removing one side at a time and slowly pull the sidewall away from the concrete. Continue around each corner and each side until all forms are removed. Use some 150 grit sandpaper to soften and remove rough edges from the underside. Always work away from the corners to avoid damaging the corner since the concrete is still green and not fully cured. Then slowly flip the concrete vertically and then back down. Pull the base of the mold away from the concrete to reveal your brand new concrete tabletop. Let the concrete cure for a few hours prior to doing the remaining sanding. You can sand the concrete by hand or you can use an orbital sander. Wet polishing the concrete with a concrete polisher is another option if you have the equipment. Use a razor blade to remove the silicone from the sliced agate, and then use an orbital sander with 220 grit paper to round over the corners and to smooth the surfaces. Sand a little extra around the embedded object to level it out with the rest of the surface as needed, but do not sand the embedded object to avoid scratching it. You can fill in any air holes or defects by mixing up a little Portland cement with water to create a paste. Rub the paste into the holes and areas as needed, and let this cure for about a half hour, and then do the final sanding to remove the excess paste. Use a hand sander or orbital sander for this process, or a combination of the two. Lastly, we'll apply a sealer to all surfaces of the concrete. I used a stone/tile sealer from the Home Depot and diluted it about 1 part water to 1 part sealer. I then used a clean rag to apply about 6 thin coats to the top and sides. Wait about a minute between coats and apply 1 or 2 coats to seal up the underside of the table as well. Lastly, you can attach the concrete to the base using 100% silicone. And that's all there is to it.
All right, thanks so much for tuning in to DIY Projects with Pete. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and that it inspires you to build your own concrete end table. For the complete tutorial, head over to DIYpete.com/concrete end table. And if you did enjoy it, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Best of luck with all your upcoming DIY projects, and cheers from Montana.
I invite you to check out some of the other videos on the channel. Click on the left thumbnail to learn how to build a cutting board, and on the right thumbnail to see how to create a chalkboard coat rack. Cheers!